Good afternoon to all of you, and a very warm welcome to the Immigrant Council's annual Integration Conference. The title of this session is Replacing the System of Direct Provision. My name is Donna Vuma. I'm a member of the Movement of Asylum Seekers in Ireland and the founder of Every Child is Your Child, a community group that works towards supporting children living in direct provision with school essentials. I have lived experience with my 3 children in the direct provision system, and we have been waiting for a decision on our international protection claim for 7 years now. I'm currently studying towards a BA Joint Honours in Politics and International Relations with Sociology at the University of Limerick. I will be the moderator for the panel discussion this afternoon, following an address from our keynote speaker, Minister for Children, Disabilities, Equality and Integration, Minister Roderic O'Gorman. Direct provision was introduced as an emergency and temporary measure in 1999. That means that the direct provision system has been in place in Ireland for over 20 years now. During that time, it has attracted a lot of criticisms from the residents and from civil society. The system has been a subject to much research and many reports criticizing the living conditions, the human rights breaches, and the integration prospects of people living in the system. In 2019, the Irish government established an advisory group that was chaired by Catherine Day, former Secretary General of the European Commission. The advisory group investigated how to replace direct provision, speed up the process, and how people are accommodated and treated during and after the asylum process. The report was published in October 2020. Reflecting commitment made in the program for government, Minister Roderic O'Gorman has articulated a strong commitment to replacing the system of direct provision. His work started with overseeing the formulation of the government white paper on direct provision, which we will hopefully hear when to expect that white paper today from the Minister. Without any further delay, it is my pleasure to welcome and introduce our keynote speaker for this session. Minister for Children, Disabilities, Equality and Integration, Roderic O'Gorman. In February 2020, Minister Roderic was elected TD for Dublin West. As his priorities are on tackling climate change, increasing accessibility of childcare, expanding and improving public transport, and ensuring availability of affordable homes. Prior to being elected to Dáil Éireann, the minister served on Fingal County Council, having been first elected in 2014 and re-elected in 2019. As a lecturer of law for the last 10 years, he has seen how law reform can achieve real change for people. For the minister, campaigning for change means working with others, which is why he was a leader in the Yes Equality campaign in Dublin West for the marriage referendum and was involved in the local campaign to repeal the 8th Amendment. As an EU law lecturer, his work with the DCU Brexit Institute focuses on how we manage the challenges of the UK leaving the European Union. Education is the minister's passion. As well as being a lecturer in DCU, he has served on the board of management for 5 local schools and understands the importance in investing in educational, vocational, and mental health facilities and services for children and young people. Minister, you're very, very welcome, and I'll be handing over to you at this point. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Donna. Can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear me okay there? That's great. Brilliant. Thank you very much. And thank you for that introduction, and good afternoon to everybody. I want to thank you for inviting me to participate at your conference today. And even though I can't be with you in person, I really do welcome the opportunity to speak with you all. Look, unfortunately, I'm saying to Brian earlier on, I'm not going to be able to stay for the Q&A today, but I'll be touching base with Brian and with other members of ICI in the next few days, and I'm sure they'll feedback some of the sentiments that come from the Q&A session. And I think this conference and its theme is very timely, particularly with the forthcoming publication of the white paper on ending direct provision, which will be published next week, and the interim report of the government's anti-racism committee, which will be following soon afterwards. In the programme for government that was agreed last year, the government renewed its commitment to equality and integration and migrant rights. We have pledged to advance a number of areas in a number of measures in other areas as well, such as LGBTI+ rights, women and girls, providing for persons with disabilities, the wider integration agenda, a very strong focus on anti-racism, and of course the white paper on ending direct provision. And the white paper, which, as I say, will be published next week, will set out how the state's new international protection accommodation policy will be structured. It'll show how it will be based on a human rights-centred approach, and it will detail the steps towards achieving this new system. And achieving this new system will not just involve my department, it will be a whole of government approach, but we see it further as a whole of society approach in completely reimagining the way in which we accommodate those who are living in this country seeking international protection. So I want to reiterate what I've said to various NGOs and what I've said publicly up to now. This white paper isn't about tinkering at the edges of direct provision. We're not looking to reform the system. We are looking to end it and bring about a new model of accommodation that recognises, in the first instance, I suppose, the complex needs of the many people that come here seeking protection, but also that the institutionalisation that was very much an element of direct provision needs to end, and we need to work towards integration from day one in how we accommodate international protection applicants. Included within the white paper, there'll be a new approach to community involvement, and that's being developed in collaboration with other government departments and agencies, local authorities, and of course with NGOs and civil society organisations. I believe the new model will help foster the integration and inclusion of protection applicants in their host communities through the auspices of voluntary community organisations and local development companies as well. Expertise on housing, on asylum, on refugee integration, on migrant rights, on community development, on equality, expertise without which we could never have hoped to actually design a new system. That expertise has been sought throughout the drafting of the white paper. And I know I've spoken to a number of people who are joining today, and indeed ICI and other NGOs to get their input into how we actually design this system. And I also engaged directly with a group of residents currently living within direct provision to get their first-hand experiences of the many problems with the system. And I appreciate the help Massey gave in drawing that group of current residents together. Fair procedures and a human rights-based approach will be the cornerstone of the new system, and I'm guided by that approach, and I'm guided by principles that encourage the promotion of integration into local communities from the reception phase, which benefits both the state and those who receive permission to remain here. And bearing that in mind and in line with that principle, I want to ensure that the new model ensures that accommodation and supports are provided in line with international refugee and human rights law, makes specific provision for children and also for persons with vulnerabilities and special needs, and contains and manifests proactive policies for the integration of refugees into communities. There's a lot of good practice in Ireland that we can take influence from, in particular with respect to the integration at local level, where many communities have already welcomed newcomers and taken active steps to support their integration. From the point of view of the state, the Irish Refugee Protection Programme community sponsorship scheme is a really good example of this. But we have obviously lots of examples of Friends of the Direct Provision Centre forming all over the country, where communities have come together to actually build strong relationships with those living in direct provision at the moment. So the process of change will be complex, and it's going to take time. And it's coming at a time when we still have housing pressures and when the response to the pandemic is absorbing significant resources. And some of the big capital projects that we'll need to achieve it won't come on stream immediately. And And so while we're moving to the new system, much needs to be done to develop new and existing partnerships and to move away from the current system. And all of this while continuing to accommodate the thousands of people who are in the direct provision system at the moment. So I've always been, I think I've always tried to be as honest as possible that this a change of this magnitude can't be delivered in an incredibly tight time frame, but nevertheless, I believe the time frame we'll set out is ambitious, and I am confident that within that time frame we can develop a model, one that's responsive to the needs of residents, one that's cost effective and involves more stakeholders who want to support residents, but up to this point haven't always had the means to do so. And the model for integration into the community feeds into the work of the Migrant Integration Strategy, and I chair the committee that monitors the progress of the Migrant Integration Strategy. And the monitoring committee is comprised of key NGOs and other departments and agencies that specialise in the issue of migrant integration. The original strategy was launched in February 2017, and it provides a framework for the government's approach to the issue of migration. And in November of last year, I announced the decision to extend the migrant integration strategy to the end of 2021, bearing in mind the disruption that had taken to the rollout of its various actions and ensuring we got them delivered by the end of this year. The strategy is designed to target all migrants legally in the state, and its actions are delivered by government departments, local authorities, local communities, business sector, sporting and arts organisations, and NGOs across a number of policy areas that are relevant to the integration of migrants, including employment, education and social inclusion. And obviously the strategy goes some way to addressing racism and xenophobia as well, but I'll speak more directly about those issues later on. As you know, the Immigrant Council of Ireland was approved funding under the Asylum, Migration and Integration Fund towards the creation of an integration hub. And this integration hub will function as a national focal point and service provider. And the hub acts in many ways as a catalyst and a focal point for discussion and development of good practice and policy on migrant integration. And since the launch in 2017, the Integration Hub facilitates the development of good practices and policies on migrant integration. The direct service has two broad areas of focus: civil and political participation, and obviously then anti-racism as well. And the service provides workshops and other capacity building activities on civil and civic and political participation. The anti-racism work involves providing aid to victims of racism and discrimination by building a national support service network, public awareness raising, diversity training and research. And the hub will further train and support groups to provide workshops and training on the two issues. The hub will also provide migrant leadership capacity building through training and development opportunities. I think these are all really important actions. And again, it highlights that really important role that civil society can play. And the success of this project has led to funding being approved for the Integration Hub 2, which will allow all this really important work to continue on into 2022. As regards the other integration strategies that are overseen by my department, I am fully committed to improving the lives of two of our country's most marginalised groups, the Traveller and Roma communities. And this is primarily being done through the implementation and the monitoring of NITRIS, the National Traveller and Roma Inclusion Strategy, which again runs until 2021. And again, this strategy represents a whole of government approach. It's monitored by a steering committee, again, which I chair, and it includes representatives from Traveller and Roma organisations, as well as a range of civil society organisations as well. And this strategy does demonstrate strong progress in our advancement towards a progressive, fairer and more equal country. I think there are notable milestones that have been achieved, and I think we'd all single out the recognition of Traveller ethnicity in 2017 as a key achievement in this area. But I think we're also conscious that discrimination remains prevalent in the lives of many of our traveller and Roma community, and I think this was demonstrated in the recent large-scale research that was undertaken by the European Fundamental Rights Agency. So I suppose the programme for government, as we know, sets out a range of issues that need to be tackled in terms of physical and mental health within the traveller and Roma communities, education and employment. And I look forward to working with other ministers across departments to advance each of those issues. When you look at the NITRIS and you look at the migrant integration strategy together, the work of these committees and many of the, I think the clear and ongoing existence of racism against minority groups within the country that these strategies revealed led to the appointment last year of an anti-racism committee in June of last year. And its purpose is to develop an understanding of the nature and the prevalence of racism in Ireland and to work towards achieving a social consensus on actions required by both state and non-state actors. And I'm particularly interested in this context of anti-racism in issues around policing, around health, around accommodation, and showing ways, tangible ways in which the concerns about racism in these areas can be addressed. And the work of the committee will culminate in a draft national action plan against racism, which will be published later this year by the government. As we know, we haven't had a national action plan against racism in Ireland since 2008. So I think it's a very important step towards recognising that racism is still a very present factor in the lives of so many people in Ireland, and there must be a very clear set of actions taken by government to stop this. As you probably are aware, Professor Caroline Fennell of UCC and also a member of IREC was appointed the chair of the committee, and she has been working with the members of the committee and engaging with stakeholders, and in particular engaging with people who have experience of racism. Now, I've had 2 meetings with the committee already, and I've engaged with them particularly on their first interim report. And this first interim report will be brought to Cabinet in the next number of weeks, certainly by early to mid-March, and will be published at that stage. The committee are engaged in a consultation on the National Anti-Racism Plan, which will be rolled out again over the next number of weeks. I look forward to continuing to engage with it over the year until it provides me with its final report in August, at which stage we'll be bringing the new National Action Plan against Racism to the Cabinet. So these various plans and these various strategies, they overlap and they interact with each other on an ongoing basis. And the process of enacting these plans, it's complex, and obviously achieving tangible and measurable results will take time. And I think the plans come at a time when we are facing growing societal pressures. And I think the response to the pandemic has kind of it takes a huge amount of the attention of the public service and indeed government generally. Much will need to be done to develop new partnerships and to grow current programs and support grassroots organisations, all who face numerous challenges, and again, whose challenges have only been magnified by the current crisis. But I'm confident that we can continue to develop a model towards greater equality in our society, a model that's responsive to the needs of Irish residents, that's innovative, that involves more stakeholders who want to support these actions, but most importantly, a model that is centred on human rights, centred on equality. And those key goals will be fundamental to what we do in terms of our engagement with migrant communities, in terms of our engagement with traveller and Roma communities, in terms of the new national strategy against racism, but I suppose in the most immediate term will be central to the white paper, which will be published next week. So thank you very much for your time. Again, apologies that I'm not going to be able to stay and join in the questions and answers, but I've no doubt in the terms of the announcement and the engagement on the white paper, I'll be engaging with many of the NGOs here to get their sense of the white paper proposal, both in terms of its initial scope, but also just as significantly in terms of the first steps we need to take to start to implement it. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister Roderic O'Gorman. That was very insightful. Just before I introduce our panel to you, where we'll be discussing the implications of the day report, I would like to let you know that we have a Q&A box at the bottom where you can post your comments, contributions, and questions. I just want to encourage you to use it. If we get some questions that are directed to the panel, we will be answering those at about 3:30 p.m. So please just drop your questions in the Q&A box. And also please do keep it respectful and constructive. That would be great if you can. And without any further delay, it is my pleasure to introduce to you our panelists today. First up, we have Jennifer Campbell Okeke. Jennifer is a community activist and former chairperson of a migrant women's organization based in Ireland. She is currently the anti-trafficking officer with Immigrant Council of Ireland. Jennifer has extensive experience of gender issues, human rights, and migration. She has a proven history of supporting local migrant communities in the promotion of integration. Jennifer is currently a PhD candidate with Dublin City University, exploring the experience of women trafficked into or through Ireland for sexual exploitation. She holds a Bachelor of Science from the University of Birmingham and a Master's in International Relations from the School of Law and Government in DCU. Jennifer, I will hand over to you now for just a few minutes just to hear from you and your thoughts on the day report.
Thank you very much, Donna. Like she said, my name is Jennifer Okeke Campbell. And the other thing she didn't mention is that I was also a former resident of a direct provision center here in Dublin. And so I suppose I also have experience of living in such an environment, but at the same time, and one of the things that always happen when people leave direct provision center is to move away from that memory. However, I choose to remain because in as much as direct provision center is still in existence, there are still a few of us, we might be in the minority, that choose to remain and continue to speak about the issues of direct provision center because we do have first-hand experiences of such an environment and how inappropriate it is for anybody. And I am the anti-trafficking officer for Immigrant Council of Ireland. So it means also I work with women that have been sexually exploited. I'm also doing my PhD on the experiences of migrant women who have been trafficked into Ireland. So I look at direct provision center. It is not an environment for anybody, but more especially, it's not an environment for women that have already gone through the kind of trauma that some of us can't even begin to comprehend. So I suppose for me, I just have, I'm going to keep it very brief. The provision of safe and appropriate housing is an internationally agreed priority need for victims of trafficking, which is central to their recovery. However, the vast majority of women remain for considerable amounts of time in the direct provision center, which is an environment that is inappropriate for them. It is essential that these victims, whose experiences in many cases have triggered important investigations and chance to reflect and recover, are allowed to recover in safe, secure accommodations. And again, direct provision center is not that place. So based on the recommendation of people that have, like Immigrant Council and RUHAM and some other organizations that work closely with people in the direct provision center, it is overdue for the place to be shut down. So based from that, with regards to the day report, it's a welcome development because the end of direct provision center is long overdue. So the day report is a very welcome development, and we await the white paper. What we really want to see is a model that moves away from that direct provision center completely, but at the same time, it respects the human rights and dignity of everyone in the direct provision center, and ensures that as they are moving out of the direct provision center and integrating into the Irish community, a strategy is put in place that ensures that people are not left in the loop, people are not left in limbo, but that it is done in a very smooth way and in a very dignified way. I think I'll leave it for that for now. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much for that, Jennifer. And our next speaker on the panel is Dr. Liam Thornton. He is an associate professor in the School of Law, University College Dublin. Liam researches and publishes on issues relating to human rights law, economic and social rights law, and asylum and refugee law. Dr. Liam recently published an article in the Journal of Social Welfare and Family Law titled Argumenting Social Welfare for Asylum Seekers in Ireland. It's a very interesting read. I would recommend that you have a look at that if you can. I'll hand over to you, Liam, for your opening remarks.
Thanks very much, Donna. And Donna, as you noted in your kind of introductory remarks to the Minister, and as Jennifer also noted, conversations on ending direct provision began as soon as it was introduced, well over 20 years ago now. And as you've both noted, we've had so many reports and are yet to receive yet more reports evidencing the significant harms that are purposefully caused by successive governmental policies towards reception for persons seeking protection. Jennifer and Donna mentioned the kind of alien living environment for men, women and children. The warehousing of people seeking protection in Ireland, banished to the outskirts of Irish society, the need to queue for food, canteen dining, the only way of eating for many, sharing a room with family or indeed strangers for many years is the lived experience for persons within direct provision. For people in direct provision with the ability to prepare food for themselves, well then, it's limited to specialised shops where you can get food on premises, no doubt, so to just keep Ireland's dirty laundry hidden as we are so used to from the past. Perish the thought that people would be able to be treated as human beings, would be capable of accessing food in supermarkets and shops in communities like most others. Difficulties engaging with education, the condemnation of children to attend schools where they'll be branded hostile children. I've no experience of being subjected to the daily indignities faced by people banished to direct provision. My only expertise, as very limited as it is engaging with legal and political text, engaging with decisions of courts, engaging with thoughts analysis on issues relating to direct provision. It has never been experienced by me, meaning that even my very limited legal viewpoints cannot understand the experience of persons within direct provision. Direct provision, as Donna noted, was introduced as a stopgap measure. That, of course, was illusory in that while it was presented to the public as a stopgap measure, in private, and we have that evidence in terms of governmental minutes, emails, government knew it was a long-term solution. Continuous promises that Ireland was but just one more reform away, and we're hearing and we heard a lot of those promises in this session, unfortunately, that Ireland's always just one form away from fixing the issue of direct provision. I think we have to seriously subject those claims to to some further thought, because the best evidence of what may happen with the day report is how previous and successive governments have dealt with the issue of direct provision in the past. Protests by people in direct provision led to the McMahon group. I won't revisit the history of that, but the McMahon group recommendations, significant numbers still outstanding, 6 years after publication. But we do have to recognize, fast forward to 2020, and recognize that yes, there is some cause for cautious optimism. The programme for government, the remarks of the minister who earlier on having a human rights-based reception and protection process. And also we must acknowledge, even if it is not fully human rights based or human rights compliant, the increases in weekly allowances, although of course those weekly allowances are still at an absolutely paltry level, as well though as finally the introduction of a right to work. Some improvements with that over the last few months. I noted with a little bit of disappointment, the minister never once mentioned the day report in his presentation. I thought that was a bit peculiar, because the day report provided for such significant acknowledgement of rights. Child benefit, which should be paid to all protection seekers after 3 months. Institutionalized living beyond the 3-month induction period would no longer be provided. Non-segregation with other people seeking protection, and reintegration of protection seekers into the broader welfare state. So I'd hope that with the publication of the white paper, we will not kind of wallow, as we have in the last 20 years, in the majority governmental, political, civil servant, judicial, and societal indifference to direct provision. And we finally make that profound step to end direct provision. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Liam. And our next panelist that I'd like to introduce to you guys is Ola Odini Mustafa. Ola is from Nigeria. She is a graduate of political science and a mother of 3. Ola, like myself, has been in the direct provision system for over 6 years now, while she's waiting for a decision on her asylum claim. She is an advocate for rights and improved living conditions for asylum seekers in Ireland. Ola also volunteers with Massey. She is a writer and an aspiring poet. Some of her work has been published in journals in Ireland, and these include Up the Hill in Mayo, which was published in Correspondence, edited by Jessica Traynor and Stephen Ray, The Unknown, which was published in the Massey Journal, Autumns, published in I Am a Man of Peace, and a collection of writings inspired by Maynooth University to mark the anniversary of Ken Saro Wiwa. Ola is currently studying for a master's degree in gender, globalization, and rights at NUI Galway. Ola is the founder of Ballyhonest Inclusion Project. In 2019, she was honored with the Christine Buckley Volunteer of the Year Award, courtesy of Volunteer Ireland. And in 2021, the project was honored with Volunteer of the Year Award in the small groups category. A warm welcome to you, Ola, and I'll hand over to you now for your opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Vuma. And it's always a very exhausting exercise. I call it an exercise, talking about this whole system over and over and over again. And what we hear and what we see all the time is just lack of commitment, lack of that political will to change things. So I came into Ireland in 2014, and my first port of call was in Balseskin. And I tell people that everything that could go wrong with your application system starts from Balseskin. That place is a cesspit of misinformation. It's in Balseskin that you will hear people tell you, oh, you're a graduate from your country, you are better not include that in your application. It's in Balseskin you hear people tell you, just put in your lowest qualifications that you have. The implication of this then is that your application starts it starts on a kind of a wobbly foundation. So the first concern for me, the first major concern for me would be that all asylum seekers get access to legal aid from the first day, or from the time that they put in an application in the Department of Justice for international protection. I remember my questionnaire when I came in 2014. I looked at all this. I don't know how the system works. I don't know. I couldn't figure out how to go about this. And the fellow resident in Barseskin actually helped me to fill that questionnaire. And that questionnaire wasn't even as much as what we have now. Imagine somebody who has a language barrier having to fill a 64-page questionnaire all by themselves. That's like it's a rigorous kind of thing to do, and then you have to then submit an incomplete questionnaire or a questionnaire that focuses more on humanitarian on your humanitarian need for protection rather than why your right to protection and why you're seeking protection in the first place. And I am so passionate about the rights of children in the system as well. And this has been highlighted in the Catherine Day recommendation as well. And I also like the fact that it was recommended that people who have been in the system for 2 years, saying from December 2020, should be given permission to remain in Ireland. And we've done a lot of work around children and parenting in direct provision, and we've also seen all kinds of incidences involving children living in the direct provision system. I remember sometime last year, we had to get the community Gardaí involved in incidents of men parking down the road here and propositioning our children and trying to get them into their vehicles and all that. That's a very scary situation for a parent, and this also further reiterates the need for a shift from this kind of institutional kind of living and the congregational kind of living to integrating people into the community. People know where all these direct provision centers are. They know people living in direct provision centers they are vulnerable. They know they have needs. They have all kinds of responsibilities that they have to take care of. And people will always prey on that vulnerability. And how many of us would be able to say no to all those kind of snide remarks that we hear, all those kind of propositioning that goes on around the direct provision system, and also the right to work, which is it's the utmost right of every human, regardless of your situation, regardless of your circumstances. The right to work is an integral part of our lives. I got the right to work just a week ago, and I've been in the system close to 7 years now. And this didn't come about until I had to go on Twitter and tweeted all my life story on Twitter and got people involved. It was only then that I got this right to work that I've been initially told that I'm not qualified for. It is just so painful that, and now I'm submitting my CVs all around, and it's just, I'm still struggling to get into that space of being human once again, and getting into that atmosphere of working and feeling human again. And that is just me. How about those people who can't go on Twitter and tweet at the minister to get them to understand the needs for the right to work? So the recommendation by the day group that as applicants be given right to work 3 months from when they arrive in the country is a welcome development with me. And I hope that the government embraces this and they adopt it henceforth, or else we would have a repeat of another expert group in another 4 or 5 years, just as we had another a recommendation by the Catherine Day group, and we also had that in 2016 with the McMahon group as well. I hope we don't have a repeat of that henceforth. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much for that, Ola. Some very important points there. And our next panelist is Ruben Hambakachere. Ruben is a motivated integration support worker with Culture Migrants Center in Navan. He has a background in sociology. Ruben has a lived experience and professional knowledge of working with migrants in Ireland and several EU countries. Ruben is also a trainer and face of the Trend web responsive app used to train migrants to be job creators in their new host countries. This is an EU Erasmus project supported by the Institute of Art, Design and Technology Ireland. The app is currently used in 7 EU countries. He is currently completing a level 9 Master of Sciences in Community and Youth Work at Maynooth University. He has a passion for creating conditions for change for ethnic minorities and marginalized groups in Ireland. Ruben is on the board of the Irish Refugee Council, Community Work Ireland, and Our Table, a community-driven nonprofit project aiming to highlight the issues faced by people living in direct provision. A warm welcome to you, Ruben, and I'm going to hand over to you now for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Donna, for having me. And I'd like to also thank the Immigrant Council of Ireland for organizing today's event. And I'd like to thank all the panelists that have gone before me. It's a good opportunity for us to be able to contribute to what is going to be the outcome for a lot of people that have been in the direct provision system for a lot of years. I have the lived experience and I know how it feels, and I understand some of the issues that have been mentioned here from firsthand experience. One of the things that I'm going to talk about today, if we look at the year that has just passed, it was a very difficult year for everyone, but I think more so for asylum seekers and the other communities that are living in congregated settings. As we know, the figures that are being published about the pandemic, if we look at the impact of the pandemic for those who are not able to isolate or who are not able, who don't have that privilege to live in settings where they can actually have some enjoyment in staying at home. When you talk about social isolation and you talk about poverty, I think of my days living in a direct provision center. And that was very painful experience. And for me, another day for another person to spend in that kind of setting is not easy. And I take it from the point that every day I looked forward to the post to see if there was a decision made on my case. I waited for years and years and that didn't come. When Ola says that she has been waiting and things are not happening, I know your pain. When Donna is mentioning the years that she has spent in direct provision, I know the pain. The challenge that we have now, we have so many, like Dr. Liam said earlier, we had so many expert groups. I was part of the McMahon report. I sat there and then I resigned because for me, I felt that we're not going to get anywhere with it. There were outcomes from that report that some of those recommendations, if they were implemented, there were some winnings for asylum seekers, but those were just wiped away. And the Catherine Day reports or the white paper that is coming, I and the people that we represent and the people we work with, Cultural Migrant Center is calling for the government to implement short winnings for everyone. It's expected that all the changes, like the minister in his remarks, the minister said that this is going to be something that is going to be a mammoth task and it's going to take time and the budgets that are involved are huge. We appreciate that, but there are things that could be done in the interim. Right now, there are a lot of young people living in direct provision centers. There are children who are trying to learn from home, but they're not learning from home because they don't have the facilities to support that. How about it being changed today? One of the things that happened in 2020 for me, and it gave me a glimmer of hope for change, was the Black Lives Movement. When that happened, even though it came as a result of an unfortunate incident, what happened in the world, we saw government changing policies. We saw corporate organizations shifting from their positions, from their red lines. We saw a lot of people of color actually getting into positions of power that I never imagined would actually happen. So I believe that the Irish government has a very good opportunity to turn with the wheels of change and give the people who are in the direct provision something different. We talk about systems. For you to be able to understand a system, you should be able to work on the side of trying to dismantle the system. And I believe, as someone who has lived in the direct provision system and someone who is now working with people who are in the system, I have some insight to this. The minister, they said he's welcoming groups across the country to contribute to the conversation. Yes, we are saying the groups are there, but the government has a responsibility to resource the work that is going to be done for us to have positive integration. We can look at what has happened in other countries where integration has not been taken well. We need to see a difference for our children who have been born in this country. We are the first generation of migrants, and I believe what is happening to our children now, we don't want to look back in history and say we could have done better. So I'm saying the Irish government has an opportunity now to implement short changes. For example, the direct provision payment, social welfare payment, that could be changed. If you look at what has happened during the pandemic, when the pandemic started last year in January and we went into lockdown in March, there were a lot of people that were homeless, but the government didn't want the pandemic to spread in the homeless hubs, and they created accommodation for people. So I believe the government can also do the same. The people who are in direct provision need change. They need change today, not next month, not tomorrow, not next year, not in 2023. They need change today. And we are saying that what the government could do, and I think this takes a political will and someone to step forward and say, we need to increase the payment that is given to people in direct provision to cushion them from the poverty, because that has already created a stigma for the people who are living in direct provision. Young people in direct provision go to schools, and when they are interacting with their peers in school, it is known that their parents are on a very small payment, and that affects their own function and their development. So that needs to be addressed, because we do not want to create a system whereby other young people who are born and raised in Ireland feel lesser than the others who are born here as well, because they are not in the same system as them. And then also looking at the right to work for people who are in direct provision. I think now it's about time we stop saying who has the right to work. It's about the government just coming up with something and putting it in writing. And I think, Ola, what you did was very brave. It doesn't have to take you to go out and share all your public issues for the government to act on an issue. It takes the government, the initiative of leaders, to take leadership and make right for those people who are in direct provision. And I think the human rights approach, which is in the Catherine Day report, is something that the government should embrace, and they should call all the actors who are involved in this to come together and address the issue. There's a lot of experience. There's a wealth of experience. Enough research has been done with people in direct provision. It's about time that Ireland came up with something that is not just a policy document, but an action plan for the country to see us forward. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you so much for that, Ruben, and thank you so much for all of you for those opening remarks. I just want to remind people that we do have a Q&A box at the bottom there where you can pop in your questions that we will be, that we'll have an opportunity to answer some of them a bit later on, say at about 3:30. But do feel free to drop in your comments, your contributions, and your question in that comment box. Then some really strong points that have been raised there by our panelists, you know, in their opening remarks. And one of the things I guess that we have to acknowledge and welcome is that the government has, you know, accepted that the current system of direct provision is not fit for purpose and that it should be ended. There is a need for that new permanent system that will determine international protection applications within a fixed time limit, which respects the guiding principles that have been set out in the report. I think one thing that came up really strongly from everyone, and you know, something that we really should be looking at is the access to the labor market. The denial of access to that labor market for so many years has probably been one of the pillars that has held direct provision together for so long. We have seen a number of changes that have been agreed since the publication of the Day report, you know, where the access to the labor market will be provided to persons seeking protection within 6 months rather than the current period of 9 months, and the duration of the labor market access being authorized to increase from 6 months to 12 months. One of the recommendations on the Day report was that asylum seekers should be entitled to housing assistance payments, welfare payments, healthcare, and education, and should mirror the rights of Irish nationals. It seems odd that when that the group would not recommend a full work permit exemption for asylum seekers immediately on claiming asylum, which would be the closest thing to mirror the right to work privileges enjoyed by Irish nationals in the labour market, especially considering that both asylum seekers and the Irish state stand to benefit from, asylum seekers being able to work. I'm curious now, because we are talking about, state-sanctioned poverty. I'd like to maybe get your thoughts on that recommendation. Maybe Ruben, do you want to talk to us a bit about that?
Yeah, thanks, Donna. Yeah, because I know we had this conversation when we started on the Mark Mahan report, when one of the first things in our own deliberations in the first meeting, our chairperson there, Brian McMahon, he said that what are the things that you think can actually happen now that will bring about change for people in direct provision? As someone who has experienced poverty in direct provision, I believe I was well able to function and work when I arrived in the country. And me suffering from poverty in direct provision wasn't my choice. It was the making of the government and its policies that at that time did not allow me to provide for my family. And they only paid a very small allowance at that time. It was €19.10 a week. And I immediately said, I put up my hand in the meeting and I said, we need to see the payment for people who are living direct provision at the same level as the people who are on social welfare payments. I think that is doable. I mean, there is a lot of money. If you look at the Catherine Day report and you look at the cost benefit analysis that is made there, there's a lot of money that is paid to private people who are running these centers, which could actually be turned to giving the money to people who are living there. There's actually better sense in having money paid at a social welfare rate, and then let the people who are living in those centers pay the rent, and the people actually benefit better because they have control. It actually gives you control. Having money coming to you that you have control of, it gives you that sense of autonomy where you can do things for yourself, not depending on someone or controlling. Because what direct provision system has done is to disempower communities. A lot of people came here very strong in mind and in health, but when they leave direct provision, they've been affected so much that their function is affected in how they integrate, which the minister in his remarks he said he wants integration from day one. Someone who spent 7 years in direct provision is arriving day one in Ireland because of what the system has done to them. It has taken away the responsibility of an adult to provide for that family or for themselves. And they have to learn new skills of adapting, which they came with, but they have to learn them. And that's taking a lot of years of their time. How about how are they going to settle into college or into employment if they have to relearn adult skills that have been disempowered by the direct provision system? So for me, I think the state has a responsibility to take care of people who are living in direct provision in a way that is more dignified than just providing a social welfare payment that even they don't give to their kids as pocket money a week. That doesn't make, a lot of people wouldn't give their kids that kind of money a week. Then how do you expect to give that? I know it's providing an accommodation and food, but most people don't even want the food that they are being given. So what we need to see is where people have control of their own lives. That has to, state-sanctioned poverty has to change. We need to see a model where people have control of their lives.
Certainly, that's spot on, Ruben. I'm curious to get your thoughts on that, Liam. I know you have done extensive research in that area, and you've talked about an increment in the DP allowance. Maybe you can, give us your thoughts on that particular recommendation as well, but maybe your thoughts on it as well. Thanks.
Yeah, just to, everything Ruben said really is kind of like, it's about empowerment. It's about trusting people can make the decisions for themselves and not simply assuming that the state has to provide services. In terms of kind of the day report recommendations, yes, there is that 3-month limit within the day report recommendations for both access to non-institutionalized accommodation and access to child benefit. and welfare rates akin to, similar to kind of what would be available once persons meet the conditions that apply to all for those payments. I think it was one of the most important recommendations of the Day report. It's not something that has been aired very much. It's not something that much attention has been given to within kind of, I suppose, governmental or political kind of engagement with the Day report, which is a little concerning, because I have a feeling that a lot of political focus is on that extraordinarily important accommodation question, yet failing to acknowledge that the Day report doesn't see kind of everything as an either or situation. It is accommodation that respects the integrity of the individual, where a person cannot access the labour market, that they are provided a modicum of dignity through a core kind of social welfare payment well above what it currently is, and also coupled with the need to have a fair and efficient determination system.
Great. Thanks, Liam. Speaking about that, in terms of the the state-sanctioned poverty, as we keep saying, we know how much that has an impact not only on the individual but on the children, as Ola outlined earlier on. But also, I guess something that is of a very huge concern is the length of time that people are having to spend in the direct provision system, and the length of time that it takes for people's applications to be processed, which would then obviously in turn allow them to move on with their lives or to access the labor market. The length of time that people are spending waiting for a decision is one of the biggest problems. The imposition of a 6-month statutory timeframe for processing asylum claims is unhelpful without consequences or benefit for a person seeking asylum if and when the state fails to meet this deadline. The state needs to be matching this with legislative provision for the granting of permission to remain to any applicant who has not received a final decision on the asylum claim within 18 months from the day they lodged their application. This would end the legal limbo facing so many people that are seeking asylum and ensure that people are not waiting for a very long time for a decision on their application. It was really disappointing to see that there's no such safeguards that exist or that are being recommended in the proposed changes to the process. What would your thoughts be on that, Ola? I wonder.
So I've always, reiterated and keep repeating that even if we are allowed to live in the communities and you have some kind of autonomy over your life, you have a little bit of control and all that, the fact that this one piece of paper is still holding you back from reaching that, from exploring the full options that are available to you, it still sets you back, if you understand what I mean. So people are in the system for 7, 8, 9, 10 years. And what happens after that? I know people who left the system when I came, and some of them just got into employment last year because they had to spend the entire years going back to school, going back to further training. And some of them spent years in therapy and all that, and then before proceeding to work. So I think that the first thing that government needs to consider is the length of time that it takes to process application. You and I are still here 7 years after. And I look at my application, I'm not on deportation. My case is not in judicial review. There's nothing on earth stopping my application from being just rounded up and get me out of this system. If people are going to be here for 5, 7, 8, 9 years, I think that is inhumane. That needs to be addressed. There needs to be a better way of processing application. And if the recommendation of the Catherine Day group is that people that 6 applications should be finished within 6 months. We want to see that, but we want to see quality first instance decision being issued. It is not enough that we get interviews within the 6 months period and all that. What are the outcomes of that interviews that are held within 6 months? Issue first instance quality decisions, and even if that case is going to proceed to appeal, let it be that at the appeal stage, or at that stage where they would be expecting some kind of a humanitarian grounds for them to remain in Ireland, let that be the final the final point, the final points that people have to battle this legal chaos in the system.
Very true. I guess one thing as well that we don't hear enough about, the effects that, that weight has on the mental health of the individual, how it affects their confidence, how it affects their ability to move on once they finally get that piece of paper that, that says that you are now officially allowed to be a part of the society or to be a part of us. We're not really focusing on the impacts that has on the individual and on the children. And I know, Jennifer, you have a lived experience as well of the direct provision system. Would you care to comment on the recommendations that were made by the Day report in terms of the mental health supports, the supports that would be available to people in the system, considering the fact that people are already coming in traumatized as well. People are being placed in settings where there's constant triggers. People that have experienced, like you mentioned earlier on, trafficking, are being placed in these trigger-filled environments where they're constantly not feeling safe. Maybe if you can just touch on that as well.
Thank you very much, Donna. I'm gonna just tell you a 1-minute story. When I went into direct provision many years ago, 2 months into the center where I was, I met a Zimbabwean lady, very beautiful woman, and always with a lovely smile. And she had come from Zimbabwe then. And 8 months in direct provision center. 8 months later, because I was there for almost 3 years, she went mad, like mad, after 8 months. So in essence, she survived Mugabe's regime, but the direct provision center broke her spirit. That is how bad the direct provision center is. Many years later, I ran into her again in O'Connor Street. I didn't recognize her again because she had aged overnight. And, she wasn't better. But that's what direct provision center can do to a human being. You can go through a lot of things, but the direct provision center has this way of crushing every dream, you need to really fight to stay above water to survive direct provision center. So you see, the thing is that everybody in the direct provision center, one way or the other, needs some sort of mental health counseling. That is the truth of the matter. But now when you talk about women who have been trafficked, women that are coming out from trauma as it is, and then you put them in a very traumatic environment, how do you expect them to survive? How do you expect them to cope? You understand what I'm saying? So the direct provision center, everybody there, and then you talk about the kids, the children in direct provision center. Some of them can't even verbalize how they feel because you put people in these enclaves because it's an enclave. You put them into this confined place. And after a while, you tell them to go out into the community. How are they supposed to navigate the community? When it's something that they should have been doing from the first day of coming into Ireland. But this is taken away from them and they have no say in it. Do you understand? But you see, the mental health is one aspect of it, where the direct provision center just holds you and breaks you up. But there are also other issues that comes up with direct provision center. Women are so sexualized in direct provision center. Gender-based violence, it's, you know, especially within this corona period, it's at its peak in direct provision centers. You know, it's a place where people know that they can go and get a migrant woman's body for free, or for whatever cheap price they want to offer the woman. Because what? The center, the system puts you in there, and the system puts you in chains. You know, you are chained up, and then you are told not to do anything about those chains, because what can you do at the end of the day? So the impact of direct provision center is something that I know it's been researched, but the depth of it, we are yet to uncover. Maybe by the time direct provision center ends, we'll begin to see the real impact of what direct provision center has really done to the lives of people. It shouldn't be there, it shouldn't exist. But unfortunately, it is still there. There are so many things. Women are impoverished. A lot of single mothers can't cope, and a lot of single mothers are forced to, they are pushed into very extreme vulnerable situations where they do what they have to do to survive. And sometimes it involves selling their body to survive. And the system that forces a woman, a mother, to do that is a system that needs to change rapidly. It's unacceptable.
Yeah, certainly. Very, very true, there, Jennifer. Just to remind you again, with the Q&A box at the bottom, drop in your comments, questions, and queries. You know, the minister talked about how a human rights-based approach will be the cornerstone of whatever comes in to replace, you know, the direct provision system. I'm really glad that he mentioned that they're not looking to reform the current direct provision system, that it absolutely needs to end. We need to move away from that institutional setting of accommodating people into something that fosters integration and inclusion of people from the very first day that they arrive in Ireland seeking protection. What would be the ideal system, or what would we be hoping, you know, to see, or to be the new way of accommodating international protection applicants, and what would be the key features? I know we touched a bit on, you know, the short-term wins, the stuff that can be done immediately, things that don't, you know, that don't have to take years, but there's certain recommendations that can be implemented, you know, immediately. What would that look like for you? Maybe if we start with Dr. Liam, and then we'll go on to Ola, Ruben, and then Jennifer.
Given that the minister has framed it as a human rights-based approach, then immediate, and I do think, I suppose the short-term wins are extraordinarily important. You know, from the Day report, where is the implementation of Day's recommendation of child benefit, which could have been done since October? Where is the increase of the weekly allowance to a dignified rate, which Ruben and Ola had spoken about, kind of did that need for dignity. The long-term issues, yeah, there are significant issues due to various other kind of political factors on housing that may take a while. I was, in one sense, kind of intrigued because I don't know the contents of the white paper, but the minister mentioning kind of the community, there's going to be a community piece within the white paper on, and I think you may have been referring to accommodation in that regard. I suppose it's the state's obligation to ensure that that accommodation is in place. As Jennifer and you mentioned, Donna, the segregation issue. I'd be reading the white paper to ensure that it is not segregated accommodation like we currently have. The not-for-profit model, which has been floating around there, you know, whether the indignity of direct provision is done for profit or not for profit, once the indignity is not done. So yes, the housing issue as something that needs to be so immediately tackled, because Jennifer has outlined, yet again, all the reasons why that is needed. And my final point is we also have to recall that they recommended that for everyone who was awaiting a decision for the disgracefully long period of 2 years in December 2020 should be provided with a residency status. If they wish to continue their protection claim, they may do so, but secure in the knowledge that they'll have a residency status. So I think it is going for those short-term wins and also subjecting to maybe a little bit more analysis what exactly or how the white paper envisages what a human rights-based approach is. Just from the whole context of the minister's contribution, I'd wonder whether it is a human rights-based approach towards reception for people seeking protection.
Great. Ola?
Yeah, I agree with Liam. I think the government should focus on the short wins and then work on the long term recommendations. And the first one for me as well would be the accommodation aspect. Have you gone to accommodation centers that has the hotel styled kind of accommodation system? Can you ever imagine the kind of chaos that goes on in those kind of settings? When I arrived here in 2014, I shared a house with a woman, and she was upstairs and I was downstairs. There's just two of us in that house, and I do understand how mad and how crazy it was. My last child was 9 months when I came here, and all our kids would be like 7, 8 years, and the teenagers and all that. How do you it gets mix up people who have who have babies and the ones who have teenagers in the same house? My kids, they have to play. They make noise. That's what they do. But it is our teenagers want to do their thing. They need the peace. They need the quiet and all that. So I think government needs to, they need to, accept that this system it has to go. I'm not against the fact that reception areas should still remain, because it would be a disaster if I come into this country newly and I'm just put in a house and that's it. I think the reception areas should be used as a kind of orientation grounds for people, and it shouldn't take more than 90 days for all these processes to be done. Getting your PPS number and information about accessing services, where to get support, all the vulnerability assessment and all those things should be done within that 3 months, and people be placed in independent, living kind of spaces, and not having to then transition to further congregational setting. You have people who have been through traumatic experience. I remember when I was in bus setting, there are people who have all forms of mental health issues, and they don't sleep at night. You hear people screaming the whole night, throughout the night, without help, without any form of intervention or assistance and all that. And you begin to wonder if you are supposed to be like a kind of a therapist or like a trauma doctor to these people. It is not my duty to look after my fellow asylum seeker. It is the duty of government to do all that. And I think that can be done if people are seen as people. And like I said in one of my tweets the other day, behind every ID number 897, what, they are real people. They are real humans whose lives are impacted by whatever policies that government puts in place. It's high time that government recognizes asylum seekers as humans, people who have lives prior to coming into the country, and not just some kind of economic migrant. And it's okay to be an economic migrant. There's nothing wrong with that. We all strive for economic stability in our lives. So whether you do it by seeking asylum, or you do that by migrating via work permit or whatever means, it's fine, as long as you're not committing any crime, and your decision is not having any negative impact on the other person. So that would be my own opinion.
Great, thanks, Ola. Ruben?
Yeah, thanks, Tona. Just listening to all of that, I like that statement you made that it's okay to be an economic migrant, because one thing that has happened is that the government of Ireland is actually trying to criminalize seeking asylum. And before they even, that culture of disbelief is very rampant in the people that assess asylum claims. And I think what is very important right now, you're asking, what do we expect or what do we expect to see? I think it's a two-pronged approach. It's about addressing the asylum process itself and then looking at the conditions of people who are living in whatever model that is going to come up. So in looking at a human rights approach, we're looking at all the human rights that the minister himself enjoys, the things that he has access to. Those should be given to the people that are arriving in Ireland. Every Irish citizen has human rights. Those rights are recognized. So we need to see people that are arriving in Ireland having the same benefits and having the rights that are afforded to anyone who is living in Ireland. So one of the things a starting point, like Liam and all I've said, is addressing the payments, the money that addresses the poverty. And I think addressing poverty is a paramount human right. And then also looking at on-door policy of accommodation. Yes, we want to see the reception centers in place, but for a time frame, and it has to be something that is adhered to, not to leave people in limbo. And one of the things that has happened is most people have gone in there and they don't know when they're going to come out. If you go in prison, even if you commit murder today, you are sentenced and you know when you're going to come out. You are hopeful because there's a date in mind. But if you go into direct provision system, you don't know when you're coming out. So without fixing the international protection system and how decisions are made, we cannot address some of the issues that are the human rights issues. And I think for me, the one thing that could actually happen now is to take people who are living in direct provision now for more than 2 years, give those people the right to live in Ireland, integrate them into the communities, use the systems that are already there for integrating people who have received the papers. So once that happens, it addresses a small number of people who are in the system, and then the government can start afresh with less people. Because right now, if we are going to wait up to 2023, we don't know how many more people are going to come into Ireland, and the government is going to be looking at bigger budgets. So with the people that are there right now, there are people who are long overdue in the system, and it's because of the way decisions have made, people have been allowed to stay for very long in the system. And then also for services that are going to be given to the people that are going to be in those reception centers, there should be cultural appropriate services. And we should look at where people are coming from. Ola said it very well, vulnerability assessment is very important. If you're going to be 90 days in a center, they need to know where they are placing you. There's no need for placing someone who needs medical services in Dublin and you place them in Cork, and then they have to travel. People have experienced trauma. So if the people who are deciding need to understand the needs of the people rather than just looking at these people as numbers, but understand the needs. And I think there are enough social workers, community workers in the country who can actually work together in government to deliver a system that is with a human rights framework. And we are, as an organization, willing to get into that conversation. And we have also written submissions, which we contributed to the Catherine Day report. We want to see something that actually respects the rights of the individual. And take it, if you're an Irish citizen listening to me today, you might ask, what does that mean? It means you coming to Ireland and you don't know anything about Ireland and you're settling in and you need the best support to be able to thrive in a new environment. That's what I'm talking about today.
Excellent, thank you, Ruben. Jennifer?
Yeah, I think for me, one of the first things that needs to be looked into, like Ruben mentioned, is the people taking the decisions on international protection, because a lot of them are not well informed. You know, decisions are made about the lives of people, and you don't have the information to make the proper decision about a particular individual or that is coming from a particular part of the world. And that is why most of the time when those decisions are made and they go for appeal, the decision is overturned. It shouldn't be getting to appeal before it is overturned. If the people are not properly trained, then maybe a kind of training should be organized so that when you are trained in particular countries, that you understand what is going on there. So that not when somebody comes in for international protection, the first thing is to see the person as telling you lies. That needs to be addressed. There needs to be properly informed, and there also needs to be legal representation. People coming, they are totally clueless. You come into a system where you don't understand how it works. You don't understand what your rights are, and you just go. There's a lot of fear in you. You go to face somebody that you are supposed to go and tell them everything that has happened to you and your life and your family life. And there is no legal representation. So, I mean, there needs to be some sort of legal representation where the person is told, you sit down with a lawyer and you go through things, as opposed to you just, I mean, we've had women who are trafficked, when later they come to talk to us, they can't remember what happened at the interview. They can't recall what they said or what wasn't said. And most of the time, they'll just tell you, I was so scared, I just blanked out. I can't even remember what I said. Those kind of legal representation needs to be there for people to help them navigate the system where they've come into that they really don't understand, because most of us don't understand it when we come in. That is another thing. Reception area, I suppose it needs to be there, but only for very short period of time for people, because people still need to be able to navigate the system. And the reception area should be, I mean, people should have access to information. A lot of people are there, but they don't have access to the kind of information that is vital to them. People stay in those areas and they don't know how to go about getting something as simple as, that is supposed to be as simple as medical card. Those kind of information should be made available to people when they come in. So independent living, there is something that always bothers me, with regards to when they talk about people in direct provision center. And it bothers me because I used to be there. So those kind of narrative, negative narrative in the media about people in direct provision center, as if all they've come to Ireland to do is take. And it is wrong, because a lot of people have come into Ireland with a lot of skills, a lot to offer the country. But when you put them in chains, what more do you want them to do? So those kind of negative image, negative narrative should begin to change. And one of the things that brings in those negative narrative is when you see in the news media where they said the government have spent all these millions of euros on people in direct provision. What they don't break down for the Irish public to understand is that the chunk of that money goes to the people that owns those private accommodations and not to the people in the direct provision center. So when you talk about independent living, most people, once you help them with navigating the system for them to get their employment they don't even want government to come and pay for their accommodation or want government to come and take care of them long term. They want their autonomy, they want independence. They want to be able to take decisions for themselves and do things for themselves. But it is very important for me that those narratives are changed, and the government can do better. A lot of that money being used on direct provision, people in direct provision center, that brings those kind of negative energy between the migrants coming in and the native Irish people, can begin to change when government give people in direct provision center the autonomy and the rights to their life and the rights to be able to go out and do what they need to do for themselves. That is what I think.
That is great. Thank you so much for that, Jennifer. And I guess there's been so many important issues and important points that have been discussed here. I mean, if we're to not that everything else in the report is not important, it's equally important, but if we're to go into that, it would take us obviously more than just an hour, 30 minutes, and it's Pancake Tuesday. So clearly our priorities for this afternoon elsewhere. But I just want to thank you so much for your contributions. And I hope that for everyone that has listened in today, they have something to take away from this session. I guess the strongest points for me, or the things I feel really strongly about, is that legal representation that we have talked about from the time the person arrives at the reception center, from the time, you know, they have been allowed essentially to, you know, to make their asylum claim. Like Ola said, so many of us had to get our guidance from fellow residents in the reception center at Basalskin. And keep in mind that these were also people that were newly arrived and had no idea themselves what was going on. So there's a lot of third-hand information, and a lot of the times it's inaccurate. And that, you know, is very detrimental to one's application in the long run. But also the quality of decisions and the quality of the decision makers is extremely important, because if we're not having quality decisions being made, as you mentioned there, Jennifer, it means that the process is becoming unnecessarily lengthy, and that could really be, you know, be dealt with by making sure that the quality of decision makers and that the quality of the decisions being made is prioritized. I want to thank you again, and thank you so much for the Immigrant Council of Ireland for inviting us to have this discussion. And I'm going to hand over to Brian, who will moderate the question and answer session and give us the closing remarks as well. Thank you so much again.
Thank you very much, everybody. And thank you to Donna for doing a fantastic job moderating the afternoon so far. I'm Brian, and I'm the CEO of the Immigrant Council. So it's a tremendous honor really for us to be able to host this afternoon as part of our conference. And I just want to thank all of our contributors, because like was said at the start, you know, people have been talking about direct provision for 20 years, and I'm really conscious that talking about again and again and again and again about the limitations and the difficulties, I'm sure you could talk about it in your sleep at this stage, and you probably do. And I think that's, you know, to be honest, it's re-traumatizing. It must be re-traumatizing every time to talk about it again and again and again. And in some ways, I apologize about that, to have to air those things again, to have to cover that ground again. But as well, there's an importance to it, because the sharp edge of advocacy on this issue is the human experience of it. And if we can't keep that to the forefront, and we can't keep the political pressure on around the human experience of direct provision, we'll still talk around in circles. So the difficulty of it is absolutely acknowledged. And again, I thank you for doing it, because it's so massively important, especially for those of you that are still awaiting decisions, as you say, 6-7 years later. So I just want to acknowledge that, because that's not easy, and the exhaustion of it must be immense, you know. My job at the moment is to reflect a little bit of what's coming in from the I think we had about 157 people watching the webinar at one stage. We're still well over 100, and lots of questions coming in through the comment box. A lot of the questions that are coming in have been very professionally dealt with by Donna in terms of the natural flow of the conversation. So I thank you for that. But I suppose just to reflect upon some of the comments, maybe before I get on to questions that I might pose back to you guys. One, I suppose, is a comment around really the entrenched power of the profit-making element of direct provision, and how that is one of the considerable barriers to any change of it happening over the last while. I sometimes think as well that is also a convenient mask for a lack of political will. I think sometimes that the entrenchment of the system and the profiteering element of it is massively important and is a massive barrier. But I think as well it also masks the widespread, I think, for the last 20 years, lack of political will to get rid of it. And I think there is a sea change on in that. But I think, you know, that was some of the comments that came in through the boxes reflecting upon the importance, I suppose, of acknowledging that for-profit approach has been really a detrimental element in changing it whatsoever. So that was some of the commentary that came in. We also had comment from Fiona Finn down in NASC in Cork talking about the proposed proposed regularization that was mentioned in the DEA report, and how easy a win that was lost and missed in the time since the DEA report has come out. The DEA report obviously recommended what has been done in the past, which is the regularization of people waiting in the system for a certain amount of time. It was done quietly in the past, but it was definitely done, and it could well be done right now. That is still in the category, I think, as has been identified, of easy wins, things that can be done that not only get people out of the system, get people back on their feet, get people re-engaged with their ability to provide for themselves, but also serves a function for the state as well, moves people on, gets people into a regular immigration status, a way that they can get themselves back into, as Ola so eloquently said earlier on, feeling human again. But also as well, I think, building trust. I think what's really evident from the conversation this afternoon is that people are exhausted by consultations, exhausted by reports, and exhausted by making recommendations and not seeing them implemented. And gestures need to be made to build the trust of those seeking international protection in Ireland with the state. And those gestures need to be made quickly. They cannot be made by the end of this year into next year. They need to be made immediately after we see what the white paper is last year. So some of the commentary in the box is reflecting that, and Fiona from NASC mentioned that, which I think is really important. And that serves many functions. That serves many functions, and I think maybe possibly one of the most important ones, apart from getting people out of the system and into a regular type of immigration status, is building trust. And trust has been broken long time ago. So that needs to be done. I think some of the other, just one other reflection before I go on to asking questions of the panel, is one thing the Minister said earlier on and acknowledged, the potential involvement in the white paper of capital projects. So I think that was a useful mention that we heard from the Minister there. I know we're all hanging from what he said in terms of trying to get a glimmer of what the white paper will contain. And I notice, obviously Liam's kind of observation that he didn't mention the DEA report in his intervention. So I don't know how much we can read into that, but I suppose time will tell. But I think the talk of capital projects is interesting, because I suppose that does lend itself towards state-built initial reception potentially as part of it. And it has been discussed, I suppose, this afternoon. Obviously, that's a part of receiving people in the immediate term, and then it goes beyond that. But just to go into the questions then, Graham, who's very involved in things like the sanctuary runners, Graham Clifford down in Cork, was asking a question about what they see in the UK with local authority housing being used as the place where protection seekers are put, and often very substandard types of local authority housing, not good quality. And if that model is only used here, would that lead to potential difficulties in terms of people being housed in substandard conditions by local authorities? I'd like to go to Liam about that, but maybe Liam, you might reflect a little bit as well upon some of the conversation that has gone around the fringes, particularly in civil society, about the alternatives. I know particularly, obviously, the work of the Irish Refugee Council looking at alternatives, that it's not just local authorities, it's approved housing bodies, even social enterprise models of how housing can be done. I think it's maybe fair to say the answer is not one thing, it's several things is the answer to direct provision. But Liam, could you give us a bit more on that? Because I know you're obviously very familiar with that as well.
Gray makes an excellent point on the UK system. In fact, slight off point, but direct provision was actually a failed pilot in the United Kingdom. We copied what the UK were going to do. And after about 18 months, the UK went, the UK basically said that they couldn't continue with that system. And so they stopped it. Yet that system is what kind of occurred in Ireland for 20 years. The reason that asylum seekers and protection seekers in the UK are in poor quality accommodation in the UK is because the United Kingdom disapplies usual rules pertaining to local authority accommodation, which usually have to be fit for human habitation. But the Immigration Act of 1999 in the United Kingdom has said that the issues about fit for human habitation do not apply to asylum seekers. So, I mean, the UK is a very unusual comparator, and it would be something done. I think Graham's point is well made, that it is important that we do ensure that whatever accommodation solution it is, and Brian, you outlined and others have outlined, I'm agnostic on what the accommodation is. I honestly couldn't care less whether it's for profit, once it is not segregated, once it is not just persons seeking protection all warehoused with each other. You know, this is either integration or it's not, with, of course, you know, as Jennifer and Ruben Nola had mentioned, you know, other than for the 90-day maximum kind of reception period. So, you know, a human rights-based approach doesn't care, you know, on how stuff is delivered once it's done in a human rights compliant way. It is just deliver it and deliver it now. And yes, those capital projects, I think that was the minister giving us an indication that, you know, despite promises that 2023 would be the time period for DP ending, that's called a push out. That's called pushing it out even further, unfortunately.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, no, yeah, absolutely. I acknowledge that as well. Yeah, it's suggesting what the structure might look like, but not necessarily the time frame in which the structure might land, kind of thing. Yeah. I'd like to go to Jennifer at the moment as well, because there was a lot of commentary both in the question box and this afternoon about the situation of women and children within direct provision, you know, and obviously our work in the Immigrant Council, you know, involves a huge amount of work around the victims of trafficking that are housed within direct provision, who are a small cohort within the overall number, we acknowledge, but at the same time, like many groups within direct provision, have extremely and appalling high needs that are not met by the direct provision system. We talked this afternoon about things that can be done, easy wins, things that can happen immediately that would start to show that there's actual reform going on. There's actually, we're moving past this system. Would you talk a little bit about, I suppose, the alternatives that are there for victims of trafficking? Now, and to be transparent, we've suggested to the minister that groups like that, victims of trafficking, those who are survivors of torture, those with disabilities, families with children, there can be prioritization, even though that's not to diminish the need for everybody within direct provision to be gotten out of there. So I just want to be very clear on that. But at the same time, the minister has to have the proof of concept back to government to say, look, we can do this. He has to say things back to the government to go, look, if we prioritize certain groups, we can begin this process. We can start looking at alternative accommodation. Victims of trafficking and others may prove kind of areas that could be done. So Jennifer, could you talk a little bit about that from the perspective of your own work and your PhD and with us, I suppose, as an organization?
Thanks, Brian. You know, you use the word that victims of trafficking, there is a small cohort of women living in the direct provision center. And because there is a small cohort of women living in the direct provision center, the government can deal with that very quickly if they want to. Because, I mean, it was welcome, the decision of the government, I think it was in August last year, where they say units will be built for women now that have been trafficked, living in the direct provision center, so that they are in a gender-specific environment where with trained personnel where their needs can be attended to. That is government moving in the direct provision center, but more can be done. I mean, like immediately. Because take, for example, women that are involved in domestic violence, there are shelters for women that are involved in domestic violence. But these shelters that are there for women that are involved in domestic violence are not necessarily available for trafficked women. But the good thing about one of these shelters is that they have trained personnel there. They have people that understand the trauma that these women have gone through. And because it is trauma-informed environment where the personnel understand the problem, the issues that these women and the children have gone through. It's also a place that women that have been trafficked can use those kind of environments. That is in the immediate. It's long term, they can have independent place for women that have been trafficked. But in the short term, those kind of shelters that are available in Ireland can be made accessible to these women. Now, when we leave women that have been trafficked and go into women generally, in the short term, one of the things government can do to ensure that women generally are not put in an extremely vulnerable position, and a lot of the panelists here have already said it, is to increase the money being paid to mothers, to increase the money being paid to women, so that you don't put women in very vulnerable situations whereby they need to do what they have to do to take care of their children, because that kind of poverty drives people to the extreme. And a parent will do anything to protect their young one. That is the truth. So these are the things, the kind of changes that can be done like now, while we look at the long-term changes. So it is, when we talk about the trafficked women, it's not to say that the Direct Provision Center is not fit for anybody at all. And that is the truth. But in the short term, women being trafficked, it's bringing women that are traumatized and putting them in a traumatic environment where you put them at risk of, you expose them to further trauma, you expose them to being re-trafficked, you expose them to all sorts of gender-based violence in that environment. So in the immediate, government can use these shelters that are already there and make it available for women that have been trafficked. But also in the short term, government generally can change the amount being paid to people in the Direct Provision Center just to get people out of that level of that extreme poverty that affects women and affects children. It does affect men. So because when we talk about women and children, it's not to say that that level of poverty, it's not having its impact on men as well. But those are the things that can be done now, while we look at the long term.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Yeah, absolutely. And I think maybe one of the things we can undertake to do after this conference is obviously go back to the Minister with a lot of the things that have come out of this afternoon session in terms of listing the short-term rents. Here's the things you can do immediately, Minister. And here's the, potential partners that are out there for you to do this with. As Ruben said, Culture are there, Massey are there, We're there, NASC, the Refugee Council, so many groups out there willing to help shape dragging this into the future. I'd like to maybe just reflect again on some of the questions in the box. Somebody asked, would you prioritize processing times and administration over abolition of direct provision? I think it's probably clear from the conversation this afternoon that both of those things are so mutually entwined. You cannot prioritize one over the other. They essentially have to happen. But I'd like to go to you, Ola. As you mentioned earlier, you're awaiting a decision a very long time, but can you reflect upon how entwined those two things are? You can't disentangle, I would imagine, how quickly you're getting a decision or not from your accommodation needs. They're two sides of the same coin.
Of course they are. They are. You can't say this is independent of the other one. No. So if I'm getting my papers in the next 6 months, and how am I expected to, or if this direct provision still exists, and I'm getting my papers in the next 6 months, so how easy would it be for me to transition from the direct provision system to the mainstream Irish society? But if I am already living independently, and my application is sorted within 6 months, I'm already integrated in the community. What is left for me is perhaps I'm doing this precarious job in the interim while waiting for my papers to come. The only thing I would be thinking of is, okay, now I'm dumping this cleaning job and I'm going for a job that is, commensurate to my qualifications or what I'm passionate about, or what I really want to pursue in my life. So we can't, it doesn't outweigh the other one. I think both of them goes hand in hand.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ola. And I suppose, just not to ask you too personal a question, but you spoke about getting your right to work recently enough. Have you found in that time, you talked as well about information back in Balseskin and total lack of it, the misinformation, the rumor mill, and all kinds of bad advice that can be gotten. But since getting your right to work, have you interacted with any support services about actually getting, you know, getting the right to work? Do you find there's any support built around, you know, you get the permission, that's one thing, but how do you go and get a job then? You know, are you finding that particularly difficult?
To be honest, I think one of the would I say success of me going out on Twitter the other day and ranting the whole place down would be the support that I've gotten so far. Organizations that I had no idea existed prior to last week, I've been reaching out and saying we offer training programs for refugees and asylum seekers on how to package their CVs and cover letters and all. I never heard of. Yeah. Probably because I don't have the right to work, and I don't think it's of any benefit to me. And now I have all these organizations lined up, and I'm thinking, okay, maybe this should have been something presented to asylum seekers from the moment that they arrive here. I know I'm getting my right to work in the next 6 months or in the next 9 months. Why not prepare me for that? For that stage, you know, these are the things that we are saying when we talk about this system. It's not just putting me in this in the old convent. No, it transcends that. It's about the entire system, the entire process, and not just one aspect of this is what is affecting my life. You know, now I know the supports are there, but we don't know how to assess them. We don't know where they are. We can't, for the life of us, find out where these organizations are.
Thank you, Ole. Yeah, and I think, as you said, there's two important reflections from that. One is that the information is not readily available and readily known. And two is that there are actually services there in terms of people doing great work. You know, we're many groups doing that kind of work. But again, it's fragmented. It's not contained in a single network, a structure that's built around somebody, which would make sense for everybody. It would make sense for you as a person going out into the workforce. It makes sense for the community around you and for everybody, you know. Sense is something that's been lacking for a very long time, unfortunately. But it brings me to, you know, I know Ruben has done a lot of work, obviously, down through the years in terms of the integration aspects, and spoke very powerfully about them earlier on in terms of the type of things that are needed in the short term. And some of the questions and comments in the box reflected a lot of those things, like driving license, bank accounts, things that broader society take for granted. You can just go in and get a bank account. It's easy, right? No, it's not for, you know, 7,500 people in direct provision. And you talk very strongly, not just today, but I've heard you speak about it in the past, about integration from day one. It was interesting to hear the minister reflect upon that. And I suppose, what does that tell you about the necessary change in attitude? When you integrate somebody from day one, you're welcoming them from day one. You're saying you're going to be an active and contributing member of our community. We know that and we accept that. It's not that we're waiting for the opportunity to get rid of you and deport you in the future. You know, it's a change in mindset that's being slightly articulated, but is so necessary. You know, can you reflect a little bit on that? And again, it's tied to the low-hanging fruit stuff, the quick wins, but there's a change in mindset necessary there, isn't there?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Brian, for that. Yeah. One thing that I've noticed, if you are going to welcome someone, even when someone comes into your house, for example, and you give them something to eat or to drink, they feel that they're welcome. But if you're going to welcome someone and you ask them to stay outside, they're not coming in to where you are, it creates distrust amongst communities. So even if a visitor comes to your house and you talk to them by the door, they know that they're not welcome. And for an asylum seeker, I think this speaks a lot to a lot of people that have gone through the system. You don't feel like an insider. You feel like you've been left outside. And that creates problems for the community. So we are raising kids in two separate communities. We're raising kids that are going to Irish schools, but being raised in a direct provision system that is totally different from the conditions that the other kids are exposed to. So what happens when those kids grow up? What happens to someone who was born 10 years ago in Ireland and they still do not have their Irish citizenship, and someone who was born here 10 years ago and they have their Irish citizenship because their parents never went through the direct provision system? Those two people are going to be doctors and lawyers one day. What are they going to say about their experiences growing up? So right now we are creating something that we do not know how we're going to respond to. I think looking at the history of Ireland, there's been a history of institutionalization. Recently, we just made an apology to the mother and baby homes. We don't want to be looking at 10 years from now saying, we want to apologize to the children who were born in the direct provision system. And I think the people who were born in the direct provision system, a lot of injustice has been done to those young people because they are born on the island of Ireland, but they are treated differently. And that has to be said. It has to be communicated at every platform that those kids deserve better. If you want to treat their parents and punish them for coming to Ireland, but you do it by the right way, by treating kids born in the island of Ireland the same. That way these kids, when they come out and they grow up, they are going to be peers, they are going to be mates, but they're not going to be looking at each other over each other's shoulder and saying, you are a newcomer to my country. The moment we communicate such and use a language of immigrant, migrant, what happens to the one that was born here that you are referring today as a migrant, but they were born in Ireland? The government has a question to answer on that, because these kids are going to grow and speak for themselves. I might be sitting here today speaking for my daughter, but when she grows of age, she's going to ask questions to the government, and we will support them. We will raise awareness. So we are not only speaking for today, but the future of the people that are arriving in Ireland. Anyone who is coming in needs to be treated in a way that they feel they are welcome into the country. And the small wins that we've just mentioned is to build that trust you mentioned, Brian. The trust is very important amongst communities. Some of the issues that we are seeing right now of the racism that is growing in Ireland, it's about how we are trying to integrate the new communities, how we've gone wrong about it. There's a responsibilities of all agencies, and it needs to be well resourced. I sit on the same panel of monitoring the integration of migrants, the minister was speaking about. There's a lot of work that needs to be done there. There were a lot of recommendations that are in the integration report, which have not actually been implemented. So we have a lot of work to do. How do we get to the point where we can say everyone is safe in the country? And how do we get to say everyone is getting the rights that they need? There is a responsibility by government to lead on this. And I would call on all the states departments to join on this, because it's not only the Department of Justice that can address this, because there are a lot of issues that are experienced by people in direct provision. We need a multi-agency approach, not just one department looking at it, because there are a lot of policy gaps. And I don't know what's going to be in the white paper, but I think we need to bridge a lot of those policy gaps so that people know where to go when they get their papers. They know which payments they're entitled to. They know who to approach for accommodation, rather than people just trying a trial and error, and then it takes them much longer to actually get into integration. So I think there is an opportunity there, that there's a lot that has been said and a lot that has been published in terms of research that has been done. There's good practice. We can look at how other countries are doing this and how can we tap into that good practice and implement it in our own jurisdiction.
Thank you, Ruben. Thank you so much. Just a couple of kind of housekeeping questions in terms of people were asking different things in the question box. If for information on alternatives and different models and things like that, again, I would say I'd point you to the Refugee Council's most recent work on alternatives. I know, for example, NASP down in Cork as well have also done great work on community sponsorship, which the type of model that community sponsorship represents, as we heard from the comments from the minister earlier, and in the overall commentary around what the alternatives will look like. It may contain some elements that are lifted from community sponsorship in terms of structures of community engagement in some way. And as I say, we don't know as of yet, because we haven't seen the white paper, and we'll hopefully see it next week. So I'd say check out the Refugee Council around alternatives. I'd say check out NASC, and also obviously the consistent and brilliant commentary of Massey as a group as well, in terms of all their analysis, and I suppose social media like in Facebook and Twitter is a great place for those of you that may be unfamiliar to follow those groups and to get to know them. Another question came in also about where to share information. So some people are saying we have courses and traineeships and internships we'd like to offer to people in the protection system. Where can we share them? I suppose the immediate answer for me is get in contact with organizations and groups like Massey, get in contact with the Refugee Council, with NASC, ourselves, Culture and others, We can share them through our social media. Again, social media is widely used for sharing these kind of things. There's a good initiative called the Open Doors Initiative as well that I think you should look into, which is private companies that are offering these kind of opportunities. I'm conscious that we're coming up to 4 o'clock where we said we'd finish. I didn't get to all the questions and comments in the box. I do apologize, but this is a topic, unfortunately, that is so nuanced. Ola, would you like to come in there, or? Oh, I think Ola's talking to somebody else. Apologies, that's me being wrong. But I would like to give the last comment. I'm going to go back to Donna because Donna hasn't spoken in a while. The closing remarks are supposed to be for me, but nobody needs to hear my closing remarks. I've said too much. But I want to go back to Donna and give the closing remarks. And what I'd like you to think about maybe in closing remarks, Donna, and sorry for pouncing on you on this, is how can members of the public keep political pressure on not just the minister, but the government in general, because he has to corral and convince his cabinet colleagues, especially in housing and other areas, that this has to happen. And it can't just come from migration groups, it can't just come from asylum seekers as well, it has to come from the broad public. So what can the public do to keep the political pressure on making sure this happens this time in the lifetime of this government, you know? So maybe that's a provocation and a question. And from our perspective, the Immigrant Council, I thank you all as panelists. I thank Donna as moderator. I thank the minister, but I also thank all of you that watched today and contributed. So thank you so much.
Great, thanks, Brian. But I think the answer to your question there is very simple and very straightforward. You know, just keep making noise about the fact that direct provision is inhumane. We have seen the impacts it has on people, the impact it has on families and on children. And like Ruben mentioned there, we will find ourselves in a position 10, 15 years later, having to apologize to people who have gone through the direct provision system. That you know, it's already evident how detrimental the effects are. But that pressure has to be kept on the government, that the whatever replaces the direct provision system has to be a not-for-profit model. It has to be based on a human rights approach, and I guess that goes back to you know, that definition of what a human rights-based approach is. But it has to be centered around that. And I guess the best way of doing that is continue to email your local politicians, continue to talk to them, ask them questions in terms of where they stand about you know, the direct provision system or whatever is going to replace it. Amplify the voices of the lived experience of the people that are in the system. You know, just putting a human face to those numbers, like Ola said, we're constantly hearing of that there's 7,500 people, but we're not, these people are not coming forward and saying, oh yeah, I actually know, you know, so and so, and this is their experience. We need to be doing more of that, putting a human face behind those numbers, so that the state starts to realize that this is not just statistics. We're talking about actual people. This is a system that has an impact on actual lives. So yeah, get involved in the campaigns that are being run by different organizations. I mean, we constantly have petitions by Masi that are going out, you know, for people to whether it's to fight the end of deportations, or, you know, as we're campaigning now, papers for all, not just for people who have been in the system, you know, for over 2 years as recommended, but, you know, everyone should be afforded that protection. You know, I guess keeping up to date with the different groups that are working in the area of direct provision would be the first step, or yeah. And yeah, thank you again so much for having us here today. It's been very insightful, a lot of food for thought.
Thank you all very much. And again, from the Immigrant Council, thanks so much for your time and expertise. And we look forward to speaking to you again soon after we've seen the white paper and we know what's coming next. So thank you.